What if in your home and even the food on your plate was quietly sabotaging your health in ways you didn't even imagine? Welcome to the Green Living Now podcast, where we cut through the noise and help you live cleaner, healthier, and more consciously without the overwhelm. I'm Amy Tedisco, Green Living mentor, organic farmer, speaker, and holistic health advocate with over 30 years of experience helping people detox their lives one step at a time. Each week, I bring you powerful conversations, surprising truths, and actionable tips to help you ditch the toxins, embrace sustainable living, and feel your best naturally. Today's guest, Cindy Olson, grew up eating flowers and greeting the sun, and still does today. But her message goes far beyond personal truth. It's a powerful reminder that answers to our environmental and health crises may already live inside ancient wisdom and simple steps and everyday choices. In this episode, we explore how indigenous knowledge, natural health, and community collaboration can help us reclaim balance and create a future that actually works for everyone. If you're tired of fear-based messaging and you'd like real hope and real steps forward, then this one's for you. Let's dive in. Cindy Olson, welcome to the Green Living Now podcast.
Thank you.
I'm so excited to have you here today and to have this conversation. And I know that we are very aligned in a lot of ways. And I would love it if you would just give us a sense of who you are and how you came to be doing the work that you do.
Well, I am incredibly lucky and blessed person because early on in life, I got to taste my first flower.
Ooh.
And I was 2 years old and I had just transplanted with my great aunt a violet plant. Now, I eat nasturtiums every morning
Oh,
and
which
they
are very
not
peppery.
only feed my nutrition, right? I get a lot of nutrition from them, right? Because they have lots of vitamins in them. But the other thing that they do is they change your mood. So
Mm.
I wake up and, oh, I've got so many things on my to-do list to do, and I don't want to become overwhelmed. So I change my perspective. I go outside and I basically gaze at the sun.
Wow.
And that's something that was taught to me when I was very young.
Oh, no kidding.
So what I feel is I was given this huge body of knowledge that I didn't even realize I was learning at the time,
Mm,
that so many other people have not had the privilege to have.
you're absolutely right.
And I am so excited to share the idea that the earth is incredibly abundant
Mm,
and we need to embrace that abundance.
yes.
We can have the perspective that we have to live in these houses or apartments. I lived in Manhattan for a long time.
Oh, you too?
Absolutely,
I think I
for
forgot that.
25
Yeah.
years.
Oh, my
But
word.
I worked on community gardens and we did the pocket parks, that became part of the
Lovely.
city's green thumb and everything like that. But we had to agitate, right? We had to be activists to get that done. But it's worth it because now there's 750 of them in all
Oh
5
my God,
boroughs.
in New York?
Yes,
Oh, that's remarkable.
right?
Oh my
And
word.
and what's so fantastic is they're not just interim. I worked on a lot of, okay, there was an empty lot, we put stuff in,
Yeah.
and then, okay, they wanted to put buildings back,
Oh.
and I got them, right? A lot of the gardens that I designed in the '80s are gone,
Oh, really?
but that's okay.
Yeah.
I look at it as, yes, we can plant a tree, but planting a tree does not make a forest
That's
because
true.
it's the complexity of things, right?
Mhm.
So we are finally learning the science of what is going on under the soil. I knew we needed to do that 60 years ago, but we're doing it now.
Yeah.
And the exciting thing is that we know exactly how to inoculate soils that have been, how should I put it? Hurt,
Mm.
right? become dirt.
Yes.
Soil is a living organism and dirt is not.
Exactly. Actually, that's a point that I talk about a lot on my farm tours is when I'm explaining to people what does certified organic even mean. The first
Right.
thing I start with is the fact that it's a living soil that has all these amazing microorganisms in them that are breaking down the organic matter to create the nutrients for the plants that you have intended to put in there. So, could you give us a little bit of a glimpse into what you've learned about soil and the communication, like you were saying? I don't know if you're also talking about like the mycelium of mushrooms or yeah, just
Absolutely.
give us a little primer on the alive soils and what that means to you.
So so all of life is a web, right? We can't think of it as just a cycle. Yes, we have a water cycle and such like that. But how the nutrients get to the roots of the plants, we now understand that it's the fungi, right?
Uh,
Just like in our own gut and things like that, we have to have bacteria and fungi to break things down.
right, the microbiome as they call it.
Right. So our microbiome in our bodies are reflected in the plants, right? That gives the nutrition to us.
Sure.
So the more that we can have different kinds of foods, that will basically be the living blocks that will increase the number of bacteria in our
Right.
own microbiome.
Right.
So I am incredibly healthy and I get healthier every year because I have been creating compost where I live, growing the soil, and every year, instead of the soil getting exhausted, it gets better.
Wow, that's
I
awesome.
have more worms, right? And I have more beneficial insects that then can basically take the pests out. So I don't
Right.
have to use any kind of fungicides, right?
Right.
Fungicide is to kill fungi.
Right.
Herbicides are to kill herbs or green plants,
Right.
and pesticides kill aphids or other things that we say eat the plants.
Right. Insecticides. Yeah,
Real
because I've always heard pesticides was sort of the overarching topic with insecticides, fungicides, herbicides, and there's a fourth one. I can't remember the other side.
uh,
So a couple of things that came to mind too as you were talking about mushrooms. I'm sure you've heard about these experiments where they've used mushrooms to clean toxic waste sites. Have you heard
absolutely.
about that? That I find absolutely remarkable.
Well, what I would say is all the concepts to make a much healthier community to live in
Yes,
are available to us now.
exactly.
Okay. Huge swaths of China, for example, that were unlivable have been since the 90s been changed by
Oh,
simply planting,
that's
right?
amazing.
But hundreds of people were involved. They're now making a new green wall in Africa
Ooh.
across the whole continent to stop more desert from growing.
Oh, that's
So
phenomenal.
all of these projects are huge, right?
Yeah.
It's not just in your backyard, but I want you to start with your own backyard
Yep.
or your own porch or
Right.
your own under
Windowsill.
lights in your apartment in the basement.
Right.
I food to feed people for 2 years out of a basement apartment,
No kidding.
okay? So, I'm just saying we know what all these techniques are. You gotta
Right.
find out what's gonna work for you and fit into your lifestyle.
Exactly.
19 different ways to compost. You're not gonna compost like a municipality would,
Right.
right? With tractor trailers coming in and you know, if
You
you're
can have a
listening.
worm composting set up
Right,
in your apartment.
right. And I
Yeah.
had one that was 12 stories high that I
Oh my
had to
gosh.
have a ladder by it so I could feed the top, and I had to
Oh
get
my
all
gosh,
my
that's
neighbors.
incredible.
The important thing
Yeah.
is just start small,
Yeah.
hey, I didn't
Absolutely.
start with 12 of them.
Right.
I got it
Exactly.
over
You built.
time because I was able to convince people in the apartment that I was living in, the apartment building, that they could get rid of their green waste if they gave it to me.
That is so amazing because then you created a service for them and turned it into something usable instead of having it just get thrown in the trash, which I remember the New York City trash in the summer.
Right.
Not a particularly pleasant smell.
And now all over New York City,
Yep.
they have places where you can put your receptacles in, but they're forcing buildings to not have kitchen waste,
Oh, that's
right?
amazing,
They
like in
have to have
Vermont. So
drainage.
we have that in Vermont where you're not supposed to throw food into the garbage.
Right,
The only tricky part of that for us in a rural state like this is we have a lot of bears. And
right.
so putting your food outside is just welcoming them to come to your yard, but that's so fabulous though that New York is doing that. I didn't realize. Wow.
Cities all over the world are doing this,
That is
right?
awesome.
And that's a way you can connect because part of
Exactly.
this is that they have, workshops and they tell people different ways to do it. And obviously in New York, people are using the Bokashi system a lot
Mhm.
because that you can put underneath. It actually is not a system where you need most traditional compost. You need
Yeah.
water, sun,
Yeah.
right? And you're going to turn it over. You need some air in there,
Right.
right? But a Bokashi system basically pickles everything. And what I liked
Oh.
about it is it takes the water out, so that water becomes incredibly strong fertilizer.
Oh, that's amazing. So compost tea?
Yeah, but it's
Oh,
a easy
awesome.
composting, you know what I'm
That's
saying?
really cool.
So, what's exciting about that is the Japanese created that over 50 years ago,
Jeez.
and they did it so that it could be under the sink, right? In people's small
Oh,
apartments.
nice.
So, I'm just saying there's so many different ways
Exactly. And to
because
enhance things
oh,
instead of, making things worse, essentially.
right.
So I know you started this natural health collaborative, which I am a proud member of. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I've really seen over the decades that the environmental movement, quote unquote,
Yeah.
has really not been able to make the impact or the inroads that I expected,
Mm,
right? We're finding out that PFAS are everywhere.
yes.
We have microplastics in people's brains
Yes.
and such like that. We
Yes.
have all sorts of things that we could say, oh my goodness, we got to give up.
Yeah.
But the thing is, humans are incredibly creative.
Yes.
And if we remain curious and we remain innovative,
Yeah.
packaging is now done with mushrooms. Why?
Oh, yes. I've seen that. It's replacing styrofoam.
Absolutely. And
Phenomenal.
it grows so quickly, and
Yes.
they figured out exactly how to, you know, make it into an industry,
Even
right?
turning it into like a leather type product I've
Right.
seen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what I think is exciting about that is in leather, you have to have tanning,
Oh,
and that's
yes.
very,
Very toxic.
very toxic. So
Mhm.
we can learn how to use non-toxic things,
Yes.
and we can, as they say, upscale,
Right.
right? And then reuse things that we have already had. And composting is the ultimate natural reuse,
Right.
right? Something is dying and breaking down
Right.
in order to nourish the next generation.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a very important point too. I don't think a lot of us humans live with the thought of what's going to happen in the next generations after us. I think a lot of times we're focused on the moment and what do we want and need at this moment to, allegedly make us happy, but we don't realize how all of these choices that we are making can either be for good or they can detract and, create a lot of problems. And
Right.
I mean, I'm very inspired by these stories that you're talking about as far as the things that you've been doing and, and so the vision for the collaborative was what exactly?
So I wanted to bring experts from around the world together,
Mhm.
but I wanted them to be, foragers, right? I wanted them to be people who grew food. I wanted them to, be people that dealt with different types of animals and how to, have the changes in animal husbandry. you know?
Mm.
Pigs are so much happier when they're foraging on their own
Oh, yeah.
than in a little container, right? And they're very
Totally.
smart.
Yes,
And
they are. They're as smart or smarter than dogs, I've heard.
yes.
Yeah.
So, but what's amazing is I had people who composted didn't talk to seed savers. They didn't talk to people that were putting in solar systems. They didn't talk to people that were doing drip irrigation. And
Hmm.
I want all of these people to come together and talk to each other, learn from each other, and recognize what indigenous people have understood since
Mm.
basically the beginning of time,
Yeah.
that we are all in this together. So a lot of indigenous populations have the healthiest forests in the entire world. So
Mm.
there's been a lot of research that has been done, and they've used the satellite imagery and to find out exactly what is in all the forests around the world. And they have now basically set that into a website so people can see where they are in the world and what's
Oh, no
around them,
kidding.
and they figured out the healthiest places,
Oh, how
and
cool.
those are the ones taken care of by indigenous people populations from around the world. So it's not
Wow.
that human beings don't know how to live in
Right.
quote unquote balance or harmony.
Yes.
Okay. Permaculture was something that I learned about what, 30, 40 years ago.
Wha-
Right. And biodynamics and all these various systems. So, what I want people to know is yes, we have to be curious and figure out what's going to work in our local area,
Right.
right? But we can say to maybe our homeowners association, for example, I want to hang out laundry. I
Right.
want to dig up some of this lawn
Right.
so that we can have something else here, right?
Before you go on, do you remember the website of the forest that you were talking about where you can look up, I guess, your
I I'll
area?
I'll make sure it gets into the
Okay,
notes.
great. We'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah,
Perfect.
it's like
Okay.
restore something, I believe.
Okay, perfect.
What's exciting is with all the ways that we can examine and have examined the earth, we are making incredible breakthroughs
Yes.
with the science of it. So we now know that plants communicate with each other by using the fungal net that's underneath
Right.
most healthy soils, right?
Yes.
There's actually more going on in a forest underneath the forest than what we see on the canopy.
Right.
So that understanding is what all the indigenous people had intuitively,
Yes.
probably thousands
And
and
then
thousands of years.
they taught it by storytelling and demonstration, I would imagine, over the years.
Right.
Where do you see the biggest positive impacts coming from as we go forward?
I think that it has to come from every single one of us. And what I mean is right now we have been in this corporate trance. And unfortunately, it has been deliberate.
Mhm.
Okay. We stopped being citizens and we became consumers. And then basically we were told everything is convenient. But now we have found all those convenience foods are literally killing us.
Right.
Right? Most of the grocery store is something that you actually don't want to touch
Right.
and eat. Okay. I mean, it's not just that we're getting cheap shrimp. It's that people are put into slavery over getting the shrimp
Oh.
because they have to get huge amounts of fish in order to feed the shrimp farms.
Mhm.
And the people that are going on the ships to get the fish are basically shanghaied onto these ships and kept there in terrible working conditions.
Oh,
And there's so many stories about this, but
yeah.
Americans now, number one seafood is shrimp.
Oh,
So,
really? And
oh,
salmon?
wow. When I was young, and fish, both in lakes and rivers
Yep.
and in the sea.
Mhm.
So when I was probably 7, 8, we would be able to go out one day and get a whole boat full of fish, right?
Wow.
By the time I was in high school, with the toxins that were going in and the runoffs and everything like that,
Yeah.
if we got 1 or 2, we were lucky,
Wow.
okay? I
That's
decided in my
unbelievable.
own lifetime.
Right, and that was a early lifetime. So,
Right.
like, how many years from the point of where you were getting a whole boatload of fish versus just 1 or
It
2?
it was only about 12 years, and I saw that.
Jeez, that's
Another
insane.
thing that I saw when I was very young was my father was into progress. He was into the military industrial complex and how America was gonna be great.
Oh, wow.
So, he took me to Pennsylvania from Connecticut, and we drove, and it was beautiful. It was this
Mm.
beautiful late spring day, and, we went through, like, some rolling hills and everything like that, and I was just enchanted. I was like, "Wow." Okay?
Mm.
And then, all of a sudden, the landscape totally changed, and it was flat. It looked totally devastated in my view because he took me to a strip mine. And they were taking off basically the tops to get the coal,
Oh
right?
my goodness.
And then we got out of the car and we went by a stream and it was copper colored. And I
Ooh.
looked at it and I saw the fish floating upside down.
Oh, no kidding.
And my father was looking off into the distance, seeing these large scrapers, right?
And
That
he
were like
thought this was a good thing.
2 stories high. And he said, "Isn't this great? Such progress, what we can do, we can dominate the earth." And at that point, I think I became an environmentalist.
I
I didn't
totally
say anything
understand
to
why.
him,
Oh, that is so powerful. Oh my gosh. Huh.
and that was basically in the early '70s, they were still
Yeah.
doing it.
Well, I remember so I grew up in New York City, and
Mhm.
I felt like a plant out of place there, as I often say, but I also remember in the '70s going to the beach and seeing plastic tampon applicators washing up onto the shore, and I'm thinking, "How what is happening here? Where how is that getting into the ocean?" Not realizing the extent of what was going on and,
Yeah.
garbage being dumped, and, now we know that so much garbage has been dumped and just incredible amounts of plastic floating.
But what's fascinating, we've now found out the bacteria, you
Yeah,
know, they have evolved to start eating it.
yeah, so that is really remarkable.
Yep.
So isn't it interesting how nature finds a way? So I've always been fascinated by, a building that is no longer there, but then you start to see trees growing up and, plants sort of separating the cement and creating life within this former, building. I mean, I
Right.
remember even seeing pictures of Chernobyl many years later and seeing all of this greenery and the wildlife was back. And I thought, isn't it remarkable what nature can do?
Yeah.
Oh my
And
gosh.
there are radioactive pigs there, and they seem to be fine,
Right.
you know?
Go figure.
And it because they're actually foraging in the ground and the fungi has become basically radioactive.
Isn't that
So
amazing? But yet they're okay.
that yet they're okay.
So that really does kind of give a little bit of a sense of hope that, oh, wow, okay, so maybe we're not totally doomed, that we
Right,
can make changes in the way we behave. And also with the assistance of nature and just the way the human body is essentially designed to heal and,
right.
we can turn things around. So with
Absolutely.
that thought, what would you say are like the top 3 things that people could start doing that would help move things in a more positive direction?
I would say that you need to basically start to make even stronger connections with other people.
Okay.
I know that sounds odd, you know, but listen, AI is changing our brains. They just came
That's
out with a
true.
study that people are using AI for companionships, and now
Right.
I get
As a
ads,
therapist even.
right, that basically we can help you,
Yeah.
right? but it's changing the ability for us to make those important connections energetically,
Mhm.
right? With other people.
Yeah.
There's energy is all around us, our bodies. And when we connect with someone else, that's different
Yeah.
than having a conversation. I love talking to people through my computer. I really do.
Yeah. Like we're doing
But
right now.
having a physical sensation of someone else
Yes.
is totally different.
Agreed.
So do not be alone.
Right.
Okay. The other thing that I think is incredibly important is that whatever you have already found joy in,
Mhm.
really focus on that.
Mm.
So every morning I jump out of bed because I want to greet the sun and eat some flowers and
Wow.
herbs,
Yep.
right? And I have a neurological disorder that I have burning pain, but I put it out of my body. Okay. I'm getting stronger every year
That's amazing.
because I totally believe that our bodies are meant to heal. It's
Mhm.
not just, oh, we can do that.
Right.
I'm not trying to heal.
Right.
I
It's
am
part of the whole
being
system.
healthy
Yes.
because around me is filled with health.
Yes.
The abundance, right? I put in one seed, I get, 100 seeds.
I know. Isn't
And
that so remarkable? I mean, I live and co-run this certified organic farm here in Vermont with my husband. And yet I still have house gardens around our house because I love that experience of taking a tiny seed, like a tomato seed. Those are really small. And then you see this incredible plant and all of this beautiful fruit that's been, growing from that one little tiny seed. To me, it's just a magical thing. And I love encouraging people, regardless, like we were saying earlier, regardless of what living circumstances you have, if you're in a city and you don't even have a sunny windowsill, then maybe you get grow lights and you can do some growing in a dark space. Like you said, you did
right.
in a basement, right? There's
Or
so many
maybe just
ways
grow
that you
mushrooms,
Oh,
right? They
that's
don't
true
need light.
too. That's right. Exactly. I think you have to be careful with mushrooms if you're growing large quantities though, because then the spores, I guess, can go everywhere. But
Right.
yeah, there's so many ways that we can connect with the natural world regardless of where we live. And I think that is a beautiful way. Because I think, having lived in a city for those years, and then I lived in Boston briefly and finally kind of moved out to the suburbs before I got to Vermont. There are options, like you were talking about, these different reclaimed lots that got turned into gardens. And I know that urban gardening is becoming a big thing again. And And community gardens, even if you
Oh,
live in a suburb, for example, there's a lot of times plots that people can garden together, which gives you the community piece as well as, the gardening and the being out in nature. And I love taking my shoes off and just walking barefoot and grounding with the earth. Now we've got our staff members doing the same thing, which is so cute to see them traipsing around the farm barefoot. Okay, so we've got two things. We've got don't be alone, find people to connect with, maybe communities of people if you have like-minded groups in your area. You talked about growing something. In your case, you're out in the sun first thing in the morning, eating flowers and herbs, which I think is fabulous. What's a third thing?
well, another thing is I want you to start thinking about what you value. So
Mm,
a lot of people value convenience,
mm.
right? Oh, is that convenient to do? Because I'm basically thinking that as you age, one of the most important parts of your body that has to be in good shape are your legs.
Oh, that's an interesting point.
Okay.
Okay.
And if your legs are not working properly, right, because you sit so much all the
Mm,
time,
mm.
okay, is that really convenient? Is it just, clicking your life away? I'm saying that human body is much better off psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually if we take a few steps at least
Yes, be
every
in
day.
motion in some way.
You have to be in motion.
Yeah.
And we can also calm and soothe ourselves while we're in motion. So
Mm.
I do a lot of walking meditations. Is that
Ah,
necessarily convenient?
right.
Right?
Yeah, people talk about doing mindful walks. I've done those with groups of people on retreats, and essentially for those that don't know what that means, a mindful walk often is silent, and generally I would bring a notepad because I love to take notes on the things that I've observed. But to walk in nature and just have the eyes of a child, or as though you've come to this location for the first time in your life and you're seeing it for, anew. And it's amazing how much more detail you see, how many more plants that you've noticed popped up that you hadn't seen before, or there's this cool insect that you didn't notice before. And it can go well beyond the walking. You can have mindful eating, mindful all kinds of
Right.
stuff. But you were talking about meditation while you're walking. So
Right.
how do you do that?
So one of the things that I absolutely enjoy is going down to the beach, and I live near
I love the
so that
beach.
I can go there. But when I first moved here, I didn't have the balance to really walk well on the beach.
Oh.
So I had to practice walking and be mindful. So I used all of my senses to help me figure out how to balance better.
Hmm.
Okay. And so I would smell the water, right? And I would notice what tide it was. And I would listen to we have a lot of pelicans
Oh,
where
yeah.
I am and things like that. So I would enjoy listening to the children shout, right? So there'd be a lot of noise. But that sort of thing seems to be inconvenient in your life. If you just walk, to work and then you go home,
Mm.
there's so many people that are basically just taught to put blinders on,
Right, and all
right?
the senses are shut down, so they're not even
Oh,
experiencing life, they're just going from point A to point B because they have to get this task done. Yeah, I mean, the whole idea of working in an office in a 9 to 5 setting, to me, it felt like a jail term.
right.
And so I've pretty much been an entrepreneur since I got out of college. I mean, I did some temp work here and there just to pay the bills beyond whatever business I was working in, but I do think that that whole model is so unhealthy, and that what you're describing is such a beautiful way of doing it differently, really paying attention to
What
your
I'm
senses.
saying is they're saying to us that we are commodities,
Mm,
right? And we only can get satisfaction if we buy something else.
right.
If we consume something because it's convenient. So instead of cutting up a carrot, it's easier to go to the store and buy carrots already cut up.
Which, of course, has less nutrition in them because they've been cut up and stored there.
Right. So I'm saying it's not that difficult.
Right,
Figure out ways to, yes, be comfortable,
right.
right? But really focus on how your long term health span is going to be.
Hmm.
I knew I had started getting migraines when I was 7,
Oh, my
and they gave me a
goodness.
lot of painkillers. And by the time I was 20, I was on so many painkillers, I couldn't even really function in the world.
Oh,
So I decided this is not a way for me to go.
right.
And I learned a different modality, reflexology, I started with
Oh, nice.
every single year. And so accumulated, it's the compound effect of being an incredibly healthier person because I was curious and I learned.
Okay, so I want to just highlight that, Cindy. So it wasn't that somebody had taught you how to do this, but your curiosity was what pushed you to find these different tools that made your life so much better and also your health so much better. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's fabulous.
And what's fascinating is that in a lot of ways, I make my own jams, I do all sorts of things
Nice.
that I was taught when I was very young,
Yeah.
and I get joy out of it,
Yes, me
right?
too.
But people say, "You don't need to make your own candles." Well, it didn't take me that long to make candles,
And it's
right?
fun, especially if it's
It's fun.
beeswax and it smells good.
Right.
Yeah. I feel like that is a lost art. These kinds of things like making soap, making jam, making candles, all of those things. I was always attracted to that as a child. And my great aunt
Right.
JoJo did a lot of that and kind of inspired that in me. And yeah, I think that's a really lovely way of slowing things down, not
Right.
sort of being sucked into the consumer culture that we have to have something fast and, we have to buy it and spend all this money on it and then what? And then it's on to the next thing. That is really fascinating. I know we are coming to an end, so I'm curious, what is something I didn't ask you that I should have asked you?
Well, I think probably the biggest question that we have before us is how are we going to live in community together?
Mm,
'Cause we're being separated by so many different ways. And, we're basically saying we should blame somebody else. We should be ashamed of what we've done in our lives or this or that. We should be guilty. Okay.
yeah,
To me, those emotions are what is being sold to us.
yeah.
Okay. So that we can then fill up our emptiness, our loneliness, which is an epidemic around the world.
Oh, yes, it is.
So I'm saying collaborate. If
Mm,
you just collaborate with your school, your neighbors, all
yeah,
the civil society that used to be there. If you go to church, go to church.
right.
If you don't go to church, go to your local
Social
community
center or
center, right?
temple or whatever,
Help the
whatever
kids.
you're attracted to.
Help the kids. Go to the library, whatever it
Yeah.
might be, you
Yeah.
know?
Have you heard about these cool facilities where they're bringing in young children with people in nursing homes and having like a cooperative program for them to both participate in? And I've heard that it's been extremely successful.
Absolutely. And it was done in Europe. It
Ah,
started
makes
in
sense.
Denmark
Yeah. Oh,
probably
okay.
30 years ago.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is we do know what the best practices are
Right.
about living in community, eco villages. I think that these McMansions and basically one person living in 10,000 square feet, it makes no sense.
No, it doesn't.
Okay. So I'm
Agreed.
not asking that person to be guilty.
Right.
I'm asking them to look at their values and say, is this making me happier?
Yeah, that's a very valid question.
Okay.
Yep.
I have lived in community with people for decades, ever since I became divorced. And it's been a good thing for me.
Nice.
And that's why I call it the Natural Health Collaborative, because we're
Right. I knew that was an
collaborating
intentional word.
together,
Yes.
right? That is a word that we were not taught.
Right,
Right.
because it was always about competition and beating out the other guy and not collaborative.
Okay.
Yeah.
The way that America was grown was people worked together to help their neighbor put up their barn.
Yes,
Right?
which is actually something that has happened in Vermont for all these years. Listening to my father-in-law, who's 88 now, talking about these stories of neighboring farms that maybe they had a fire and they had to help them rebuild a barn or all these different things. And our communities here in Vermont still do function a lot like that. Not quite to the degree that they once did, but most of the time people are wanting to help. And especially if there's some kind of a tragedy. I mean, we had a big flood at our farm one year, and we had an unbelievable outpouring of help and financial assistance that my husband was blown away by. He never realized that what he did meant as much to people as it did. And so I think that is such a key point is helping our neighbors. And, if you see somebody pulled over on the side of the road and has a flat tire, if you're a woman, you may not want to get out just in case it's some
Right.
weird person, but you might want to just yell through the window, "Hey, do you need me to call 911?" or, whatever it is. But yes, I think that that's a great point.
And it doesn't have to be this huge, big project. I'm not
Right.
asking you to start a nonprofit or do something like that. But if you know that somebody is elderly, right? Just find out how they're doing every once in a
Mm.
while, right?
Yeah.
Or if they're young kids, you know, smile and let them know that other adults care about them.
That's right. That's right.
And if you can, just start to find out which composting system works for you,
Mm,
right? And which flowers you can eat.
yeah. Have any
What
kind of resources, Cindy, that can help
I
people with that?
I absolutely do. I have
Okay,
2
good.
recipe books. We'll put those,
Perfect. We'll
they're
put those in the show
available on
notes.
the Natural Health Collaborative app, which you can download.
Oh, okay.
It's both on Google and Apple.
All right,
And
perfect.
if you have any particular questions, see, that's the great thing about the app.
Yeah,
I have the expert that will give you a particular answer.
there we go.
You can get general things, and unfortunately, a lot of the really, how should I put it, the prettiest websites
Yeah,
are usually corporate backed, and they have a certain idea of what you should learn.
yeah.
So we're giving
We're
voice,
different.
right? We're giving voice to a way of living that is going to come to fruition because the old systems are falling apart.
That's right. Yep. Well, that is a perfect way to end this. And thank you so much for your wisdom and your experience and giving us a sense of hope, because I think we need that today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Green Living Now podcast. If you are feeling inspired to take steps towards a cleaner, healthier, more sustainable lifestyle, don't miss my free guide, 5 steps to ditch everyday toxins without overwhelm. Inside, you'll get simple, practical swaps to clean up your food, home, and habits without falling down a research rabbit hole or second guessing every label. Just head over to greenlivingnow.com or click on the link in the show notes, and you can get instant access. And if this episode gave you a new insight or fresh perspective, please hit subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who's ready to detox their life and feel better naturally. Until next time, stay curious, stay empowered, and stay green.